When I found the earring under our bed, I didn't panic. It wasn't mine. I knew that instantly, but I just stared at it, turning it between my fingers like it could explain itself. A gold hoop, small, cheap, but familiar. I'd seen it before. On my best friend, Rachel. You know that kind of silence that hums louder than a scream? That's what filled our bedroom that night. The ceiling fan clicked in a slow rhythm, the way it always did when the heat was unbearable. My husband, Ethan, was in the shower, humming to himself. That same carefree tune he always whistled after coming home late. And me? I sat on the edge of our bed, holding that earring like it was proof of something I wasn't ready to believe. I could have stormed into the bathroom. I could have thrown the earring at his face and demanded the truth. But I didn't. I just placed it quietly in my drawer and whispered to myself, "Not now." Because sometimes denial feels safer than the truth. And I wasn't ready to break my own heart. Ethan and I had been married for almost 12 years. We weren't perfect, who is, but we had built a decent life together. A little 2-story house in the suburbs, a garden I loved more than he ever noticed, and Sunday dinners where Rachel often joined us, laughing so hard she'd snort over her wine. Rachel had been my best friend since college. The kind of friend who knew every shade of your life. She was the first person I called when Ethan proposed. She helped me pick my wedding dress, cried during my vows, and held my bouquet when I danced for the first time as a wife. Back then, I used to think, I'm lucky. I have both love and friendship. Funny how life waits until you're comfortable before it teaches you your biggest lessons. Ethan worked in real estate, charming, confident, always busy. I worked part-time as a school counselor. My world was made of small things: lunch boxes, morning coffee, the smell of wet crayons in classrooms. His world was larger: meetings, business dinners, client trips. I used to admire how he carried himself. Everyone liked Ethan. And Rachel? She was divorced, beautiful, spontaneous, and always joking about how she lived through me, the stable one. She'd drop by uninvited, bringing pastries or cheap wine, saying she needed girl time. Sometimes Ethan would join in, teasing us about our gossip sessions. We'd laugh together, the three of us, so naturally that no one could have imagined the truth hiding beneath it all. Looking back, I realized there were signs. Rachel's perfume lingering in our living room even when she'd just dropped by. The way Ethan's tone softened when he said her name. Or how she'd text him things like, "Tell your wife I said hi, heart." Casual, harmless, until it wasn't. But at the time, I didn't connect the dots. Or maybe I didn't want to. Because deep down, I was terrified of being alone. My parents had divorced when I was 13. I still remember my mother crying on the kitchen floor, her mascara staining her cheeks. I'd promised myself I'd never end up like her. Abandoned, broken, pitied. So, when life whispered warnings, I covered my ears. One Saturday morning, Rachel and I went to the farmer's market. She was wearing that floral sundress Ethan once said looked too young for her. I laughed at her jokes, helped her pick strawberries, and told her about the counseling case I was handling at school. She listened, nodding like always. But at one point, she said something strange. "You ever feel like you're living the same day over and over?" she asked, half smiling. I frowned. "You mean like a routine?" She shrugged. "Yeah, like you wake up, smile for everyone, pretend it's all fine, and no one really knows how bored you are. Her words stung, though I didn't understand why. I just smiled and said, I guess that's marriage sometimes. She looked away, whispering, Yeah, I guess it is. Later that night, Ethan said he had to work late again. He came home after midnight, smelling faintly of wine and Rachel's perfume. I knew it, but I told myself stories that maybe they ran into each other. Maybe he dropped her home. Maybe I was overthinking. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't happen in one big explosion. It seeps in, slowly, through moments you choose to ignore. Over the next few months, little cracks began to appear. Ethan started taking his phone everywhere, even to the bathroom. Rachel stopped staying over for movie nights. She said she was seeing someone, but she never said who. And when I once mentioned how distant Ethan felt, she squeezed my hand and said, He's lucky to have you. You're such a good wife. Something in her eyes trembled when she said it. Guilt, maybe. Or fear. Still, I smiled. Because that's what good wives do. They smile, even when something inside them is slowly breaking. Then came our wedding anniversary. Our 12th. Ethan forgot. Rachel didn't. She showed up at my office that morning with a cupcake and a candle. Someone has to celebrate you, she said with a grin. Besides, men never remember these things. I laughed, pretending her words didn't cut me open. But that night, when Ethan finally came home empty-handed, I sat in silence as he talked about how crazy work's been. And when he finally kissed my forehead and said, Next weekend I'll make up to you, I believed him, or maybe I wanted to, because believing the lie felt easier than facing the truth. But the truth doesn't stay buried forever. A few weeks later, while doing laundry, I found a hotel receipt tucked in Ethan's jeans pocket. 2 nights. Same week he'd told me he was on a business trip. And the signature on the guest form? Rachel's.
When I saw Rachel's signature on that hotel receipt, my hands went numb. I stared at it for a long time, at the way her cursive R curved gently before flattening into the rest of her name. I'd seen her sign it on birthday cards, on school permission slips for her daughter, on checks she'd written for me when I forgot my wallet. It was her. There was no mistake. I remember sitting on the laundry room floor, surrounded by piles of Ethan's clothes, the scent of detergent sharp in the air, feeling like the ground beneath me had quietly cracked open. 1,000 memories flashed at once. Rachel's laughter in our living room, Ethan's arm casually draped over the couch, the way they'd exchanged glances mid-conversation. Had they been mocking me all this time? I don't know how long I sat there before Ethan came home. I stuffed the receipt into my pocket before he saw me. He walked in, all smiles, kissed my cheek, asked what was for dinner. I answered like nothing had changed. Because I needed time. Not to forgive, not to forget, but to see. That night, I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling. He slept peacefully, one arm across my waist, the same way he always did. I wanted to push him away, to ask why, but I didn't. Instead, I whispered into the dark, God, if this is real, show me something I can't deny. Over the next few weeks, I became an observer in my own home. Every movement, every tone, every glance, I studied him. I watched the way his phone lit up at odd hours, how he turned it face down. I noticed the small changes, a new cologne, a new playlist in his car, a sudden interest in morning jogs, even though he'd always hated running. And Rachel?
she started pulling away. Her visits grew fewer, her texts shorter. When we did meet, she looked at me differently. Her laugh felt strained. Once when I hugged her, she froze, just for a second, before forcing herself to relax. That's when I knew. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a mistake. It was a secret carefully built between them. I tried to talk myself out of it. Maybe it was business. Maybe the hotel stay was innocent. But deep down, a woman always knows when she's being betrayed. Still, I wasn't ready to lose both of them, my husband and my best friend, in one truth. So, I stayed quiet. I became an actress in my own life, playing the role of the trusting wife, the loving friend. I smiled at Ethan's jokes. I listened to Rachel's problems. And every night, I replayed moments in my head, trying to pinpoint where my love story turned into a lie. One evening, as I was folding laundry, Ethan's phone buzzed on the counter. He was in the shower. The screen lit up with a message preview. Just one word. Soon. No name, just a heart emoji. My throat tightened. I picked up the phone, stared at it, then put it down. I wasn't ready. Not yet. Because if I opened that phone and confirmed my worst fear, there'd be no going back. Instead, I did what I'd always done. I protected the illusion. And in a strange, twisted way, I was protecting them too. Weeks passed. The silence between us grew heavier. Then, one Friday, Rachel called. Her voice was unsteady. "Hey, can we meet for coffee? I really need to talk." I agreed. We met at our usual cafe, the one with the chipped blue mugs and the smell of cinnamon bread. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. She looked tired. Her lipstick smudged, her hands trembling slightly as she set down her cup. "What's wrong?" I asked. She forced a smile. "Just life. It's messy, isn't it?" There was something in her eyes. Guilt, maybe? But before I could ask more, Ethan called. I silenced my phone. I didn't want to hear his voice. Rachel glanced at the screen. Her lips parted slightly, just for a second, a flicker of something. Fear, familiarity, crossed her face. And that's when I saw it. Her left ear, bare. One earring missing. The same gold hoop I'd found months ago. She caught me looking, adjusted her hair nervously. "What?" I asked. "Nothing," I said steadily, though my heart was racing. She changed the subject, talking about a new job, a new diet, anything to fill the silence. But all I could think was, how long had this been going on? When we parted, she hugged me tightly, too tightly. Her voice broke when she said, "You're such a good person, you know that?" I didn't reply. I just watched her walk away, her hair glinting in the sunlight, and for the first time, I saw her not as my friend, but as the woman who'd stolen my husband. That night, Ethan came home late again. He smelled like her perfume. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask him how he could look me in the eyes and lie. But I didn't. Instead, I cooked his dinner, set the table, and waited for him to sit. When he did, I smiled. The kind of smile that hides storms. "I found something interesting today," I said, casually cutting into my food. He froze. "Oh, a receipt for a hotel. Your name was on it. So was Rachel's." He looked up sharply,
his fork clattering onto the plate. For a moment, the mask slipped. Then, just as quickly, he recovered. It's not what you think. We were helping a client. She booked under both names for the paperwork. Right, I whispered. Paperwork. I stared at him, really stared at him, and I saw fear flicker in his eyes. That was all the confirmation I needed. That night, when he fell asleep, I went into the bathroom, locked the door, and cried. Quietly, bitterly. But when the tears stopped, something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to confront him yet. Not until I had proof. Undeniable, irrefutable proof. Because I'd learned something from years of silence. The most powerful revenge isn't shouting the truth. It's letting the truth reveal itself. And I would make sure it did.
There's something eerie about pretending everything is normal when you know it isn't. You start to notice the little things, the way someone's eyes avoid yours, the small hesitations in their voice, the weight of silence between words. That's how it was with Ethan and me. On the surface, we were fine. We still had breakfast together, still went to family gatherings, still smiled for photos. But under that thin surface, there was rot, slow, invisible, spreading. The breaking point came one Sunday afternoon. Ethan had said he was going to help a friend move. I nodded, pretending not to care. After he left, I drove to Rachel's neighborhood. I don't even know why. Maybe instinct. Maybe God. Her street was quiet. Kids played basketball at the end of the block. A sprinkler hissed somewhere nearby. I parked 2 houses down and waited. An hour later, I saw his car pull into her driveway. He got out casually, whistling, holding flowers. He didn't even look around, because why would he? No one betraying someone for 5 years thinks they'll ever get caught. Rachel opened the door, wearing the same sundress I'd complimented her on just weeks ago. She leaned in to kiss him, not a friendly kiss. I felt something inside me crumble, but not loudly. It was a quiet collapse, like glass cracking under a pillow. I drove home without crying, without screaming, without breaking anything. Instead, I sat at the dining table, hands folded, staring at the framed picture of our wedding day on the wall. He looked so young in that photo, so sure. And me, I looked like someone who still believed love could protect her from pain. I didn't know whether to hate him, hate her, or hate myself for letting it go on this long. But one thing became very clear to me in that stillness. If I wanted peace, I'd have to stop covering for them. That night, he came home humming. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, his lips brushing my neck. "Missed you," he murmured. I froze. Every cell in my body wanted to recoil, to scream, to throw him out. But instead, I whispered, "Ethan, do you love me?" He stiffened slightly, then laughed. "Of course I do. Why would you even ask that?" I turned to face him, searching his eyes. "Because I think you're lying." His smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" I held his gaze steady and quiet. "I saw you at Rachel's today." For a moment, silence. Then the mask shattered. His face drained of color. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. Finally, he said softly, "You followed me." "That's what you're worried about? That I followed you?" He stepped back, rubbing his forehead. "It's complicated." I laughed, a small, bitter sound. "Oh, I'm sure it is. 5 years of lies tends to get complicated." He sat down, face in his hands. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. It just happened. We were friends, and then one night..." I held up a hand. "Stop."
I didn't want details. I didn't want to picture them together. All I wanted was honesty, something he hadn't given me in half a decade. How long? I asked quietly. He hesitated, then whispered, 5 years. The room spun. I'd spent 5 years of my life covering for late nights, for missed calls, for birthdays she forgot to attend. 5 years of sitting next to her at my own dinner table while she smiled at me with the same lips she used to kiss my husband. Why? Why her? I whispered. He looked up, eyes wet. I don't know. I was lonely. You were always busy and she was just there. That broke me more than the cheating itself, because in his mind, this wasn't betrayal. It was justified neglect. I turned away, tears finally spilling over. You chose comfort over commitment, convenience over conscience. He reached out, but I stepped back. Don't touch me. For once, he listened. We sat in silence for a long time, the kind that fills the room with ghosts. Finally, he said, "What do you want me to do?" I looked at him, this man I'd once trusted with everything, and realized how little of him I actually knew. I don't know yet, but I promise you'll know when I do. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the city lights fade into dawn, replaying every conversation, every lie, every girls' night Rachel and I had shared. I remembered the time she held me when I cried about Ethan's distance, the irony of her comforting me for the pain she had caused. And then something inside me shifted. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to let their betrayal define me. I was going to rise, quietly, deliberately, and with dignity. Because sometimes the best revenge is not humiliation. It's showing them that you can rebuild without them. The next morning, I made coffee, packed Ethan's lunch like always, and kissed him goodbye. He looked at me suspiciously. "You're okay?" I smiled. "Better than you think." He left, relieved, probably believing I'd forgiven him. But what I did next wasn't forgiveness. It was preparation. I opened a new email account, started collecting evidence, bank transfers, hotel receipts, even photos from Rachel's social media that lined up with his business trips. Every detail, every date, every lie. Because if I'd spent 5 years being the fool, I was going to spend the next 5 being the lesson.
In the weeks that followed, I became invisible. Not in the way a ghost haunts, but in the way silence observes. Ethan went on living as though our conversation had never happened. He still smiled at breakfast, still texted me reminders about errands, still kissed my forehead before bed. But something had shifted. He thought I was pretending nothing had changed. In truth, I was documenting everything. I started small. Old phone bills, shared credit card statements, things I'd once ignored because I trusted him. Now, I combed through them like a detective in my own marriage. Hotel stays, gas receipts, charges from restaurants we'd never visited together. All tiny dots that began to connect into a clear, painful pattern. There was a folder on my laptop named Taxes. Inside it, I created another one. Truth. That folder became my armor. Emails, screenshots, timestamps, even voice memos. Each file was a brick in the wall between who I'd been and who I was becoming. Rachel's part in it all was trickier to face. I'd stopped answering her calls after that day at the cafe. She tried reaching out a few times, short, nervous texts like, "Are we okay? Did I do something wrong?" I never replied. Then one evening, she showed up at my doorstep. When I opened the door, she looked smaller somehow. Guilt had taken up space where confidence used to live. "Can we talk?" she asked. I hesitated, then stepped aside. We sat in the living room, the same room where the three of us had once shared wine and laughter. Now, it felt like a crime scene. She stared at her hands. "I know you know," she said softly. I didn't answer. "I never meant for it to go on this long," she continued. "Ethan and I, we didn't plan it. It just stopped," I said quietly. "Don't insult me by calling this an accident. You had 5 years to end it." Tears welled in her eyes. "I wanted to, I swear, but I was afraid." "Afraid of what? Losing him or losing me?" She looked up, face trembling. "Both." That's when I realized she was crying for herself, not for what she'd done to me. "I kept your secret, Rachel. I covered for you when you said you were working late. When Ethan said he was with clients, I lied to my own family to protect both of you." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I don't need your sorry," I said, my voice steady. "I need you to understand I'm done protecting you." Her face paled. "What do you mean?" I stood up. "You'll see." After she left, I felt lighter. Not happier, but freer. There's a certain power in finally speaking the truth out loud, even if it hurts. That night, I wrote a letter not to Ethan, not to Rachel, but to myself. A declaration of sorts. I refuse to carry other people's shame. I will not let deceit make me small. My silence was loyalty. Theirs was betrayal. And from this day on, I choose myself. I folded the letter, placed it in my drawer, and slept soundly for the first time in months. The next phase came quietly. Ethan was planning a small dinner party for his colleagues, a networking night. He asked me to handle the invitations and setup. I agreed, because that was the night I decided the truth would speak for itself. I didn't want chaos or a confrontation. I wanted clarity witnessed. Over the next few days, I printed the evidence: hotel receipts, emails, photos, not all of them, just enough to tell the story. Then I placed them inside plain white envelopes, one for each guest. No accusations, no dramatics, just the truth. The night arrived. I dressed simply: a cream blouse, dark trousers, no jewelry. Ethan looked handsome, confident, completely unaware that his world was about to collapse. As guests began to arrive, I smiled, served drinks, made polite conversation. Rachel was not invited, but I knew she'd show up anyway. And she did. Halfway through dinner, her perfume arriving before she did. When she walked in, our eyes met. She looked nervous. I didn't flinch. Didn't know you'd be here, Ethan said, startled but trying to mask it with a grin. Rachel smiled faintly. I just wanted to stop by. Of course she did. Dinner went smoothly, laughter, clinking glasses, polite chatter. Then as dessert was served, I spoke. Before we finish, there's something I'd like everyone to see. Ethan looked at me, puzzled. What's this about? Just a little truth. Something we all deserve. I nodded towards the envelopes on each plate. Please open them. The room went silent as the sound of paper tore open. Faces shifted from curiosity to confusion to shock. Rachel's hand trembled as she unfolded her copy. A photo of her and Ethan at a resort, dated 2 years ago. Ethan's face drained of color. I stood still, calm. That's my husband and my best friend. 5 years of lies. No one spoke. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Ethan rose abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. You didn't have to do this here. You're right, I said softly. I didn't have to, but I chose to. I looked around the table. I chose to stop pretending, to stop carrying their secret as if it were my shame. Rachel covered her face with her hands. Ethan muttered something, an apology maybe, but I wasn't listening. Because, for the first time in years, my silence wasn't protecting anyone. It was power. I gathered my things, turned to the guests, and said quietly, "Enjoy your dessert." Then I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. The sound of murmurs rose behind me, but I kept walking, steady, certain, free. When I walked out of that dinner, I didn't cry. Not on the drive home. Not when I turned off my phone and sat in silence. The tears had already been shed long before. Quietly, over cold dinners and unanswered questions. That night wasn't about revenge. It was about release. I'd carried their lies for 5 years. Now, they could carry the truth. The next morning, the world was different. Not softer, not kinder, but clearer. My phone buzzed nonstop. Missed calls from Ethan, dozens of messages from "please talk to me" to "you ruined my career." I didn't reply. Rachel tried too. Her last message read, "You could have just come to me. Why humiliate us?" I stared at her words for a long time before replying, "Because you both humiliated me. Privately. For years. I simply returned the honesty. Publicly once." Then I blocked her. The next morning, Ethan came home, face pale, eyes hollow. He didn't yell. He didn't beg. He just stood there, holding the wing I'd worn for 12 years. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said quietly, "but I didn't think you'd do that to me." I laughed softly, not bitter, just tired. "You didn't think I could." He swallowed hard. "You've always been stronger than I thought." "No," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "I just stopped mistaking silence for strength." He nodded slowly, placed the ring on the counter, and walked away. That was the last time I saw him. The days that followed were strange, quiet, empty, and oddly peaceful. There were no texts to answer, no lies to decode, no fake smiles to hold up like glass. I moved through my house like a traveler, exploring a land I'd once known but forgotten, rearranging furniture, repainting walls, reclaiming spaces that had held memories of them. Every brushstroke felt like a small resurrection. People talked, of course. Small towns have a way of turning pain into gossip. Some called me brave. Others called me cruel. But I didn't correct them, because people will always rename your survival to fit their comfort. A few weeks later, I went to my favorite cafe, the same one where I'd once watched Rachel's eyes flicker with guilt. The barista recognized me. "You're the woman from that dinner, right?" she asked gently. I smiled. "I suppose I am." She handed me my coffee and said quietly, "Good for you." For the first time in months, I felt warmth that wasn't tinged with sorrow. It took time, months of solitude, therapy, long walks, and late-night tears that came out of nowhere. Healing isn't linear. It's not a sunrise. It's a flickering candle you protect from the wind until it learns to burn on its own. One evening, I found that letter I'd written to myself, the one I tucked away months ago. I read it again, out loud this time, and at the end, I added one more line. "And I forgive myself for staying too long, for trusting too deeply, for loving people who didn't know how to love me back." That's the thing about betrayal. It teaches you who people are, but it also teaches you who you are. I learned that peace doesn't come when the pain ends. It comes when the truth no longer hurts to hold. If you asked me now whether I regret exposing them, I'd say no. Because sometimes silence protects others, but truth protects you. I used to think love meant protecting people, even from their own mistakes. Now I know love also means protecting yourself from the people who keep making them. He lost a wife. She lost a friend. And I found my voice.